Tonight, you turn if you want to. The Chancellor is for turning. Rachel Reeves says anyone with an income under £35,000 will now get the Winter Fuel Allowance. The Conservatives call it a humiliating climb down. There's no clarity on how she'll pay for the reversal or how lasting the political damage will be. I'll speak to the Treasury Minister, James Murray, Keir Starmer's former political director and the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Helen Whately. Also tonight, Back to the Future from Nigel Farage as the Reform leader suggests a return to coal mining in Wales. More than 1,000 doctors urge MPs to vote against assisted dying later this week. We'll bring you exclusive details. And as the Prime Minister beats the drum for AI, our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates reveals all about how ChatGPT hallucinated one of his podcasts. Nothing artificial about the intelligence of our duo, Saeed Davasi and Shami Chakrabarti, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, all of that to come, but we start tonight in Los Angeles, which is braced for more protests over recent immigration raids. Donald Trump's come under some heavy criticism from the governor of California, who accused him of inflaming the situation by deploying the National Guard. And today, the governor said he is even prepared to sue the president for what he called an illegal act. Well, let's go now to Los Angeles. We can speak to Martha Kellner, our US correspondent. Martha, what's the latest?
Yeah, protests here against Donald Trump's immigration policy, Sophie, entering their fourth day. This particular demonstration is in support of a man named David Huerta. He is a local Labour Union leader, and he was arrested last Friday during raids by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, otherwise known as ICE. There is a video which has gone viral online showing him being tackled to the ground and handcuffed by officers. He was acting as a so-called community observer at the time, but those immigration officials say he was interfering with what they were doing. So these protesters are calling for the charges against David Huerta to be dropped. But certainly today, Sophie, it feels like LA is a city bruised by some of the scenes we witnessed over the weekend. Cars being burnt out, police officers being attacked, but protesters also facing rubber bullets and tear gas. It feels like this situation is still escalating. It doesn't seem like these protests are dying down. And meanwhile, the war of words between the President, Donald Trump, and this state's Governor, Gavin Newsom, is continuing to Donald Trump in the past hour or so, saying Gavin Newsom is grossly incompetent. He claims that LA now is a lawless city, that it is a city being overrun, in his words, and being invaded. So the rhetoric here is quite grim from the President. Gavin Newsom accusing the President of inflaming the situation, as you said, by bringing in National Guard troops. I'm joined by Roman Palomares, who is the President of a Latino organisation, the largest Hispanic organisation in the US. Roman, tell me, why are you here today?
I'm here, I flew in from Dallas today, but we're here to support the release of David Huerta. We're here to support the union. We're here to support the community. What we're finding is that the tactics that are being used, by ICE and other federal folks is unacceptable. And that's why we're here. I met with the mayor this morning. We talked about how we can move forward. But, we believe in peaceful demonstrations. We believe in peaceful gathering of people. But there's always a few agitators that cause problems. And we're here to see what we can do to temp it down a little bit and work with the local community. We're supporting here.
Do you think there was a core of troublemakers yesterday, burning out cars, attacking police officers?
Yes, that happens all the time. Wherever you have big demonstrations or whatever, you'll have a few rotten apples, as I call them. But they're agitators that come in, and then that causes a lot of destruction and stuff. But then it harms what we're trying to do. Here we are trying to peacefully demonstrate, and then they take away from that, and then that's the story that's out national. But it's not that bad in this community.
Thank you very much. That's Roman Palomares, head of the largest Hispanic organisation here in the United States, very much hoping that this protest and the other ones that are planned across this city today remain peaceful.
It's certainly absolutely something that we can all get behind. Thank you very much indeed, Martha Kellner there in Los Angeles for us. And of course, Martha will be keeping an eye on how those protests develop throughout the evening. Now to our top political story tonight, because the winter fuel fiasco has been one of the most drawn-out U-turns in history, the political equivalent of taking a wrong turn onto a motorway and then driving for 50 miles before you can finally turn around. But every one of those months spent driving the wrong way has been politically punishing. And I'm about to show you some research that shows why the decision on winter fuel has been the most politically toxic thing that this government has done. Now, as you probably know, in July, one of the government's first acts was to cut the winter fuel payments for all but the very poorest pensioners. Today, almost 11 months later, they've U-turned. So now all pensioners on incomes of $35,000 a year or less will get the payment. But just take a moment and look at this. So this is a pretty genius, actually, piece of research by the pollsters More in Common, and it looks at how popular or unpopular certain things are, but also, crucially, how much people know about them. So if you're on the bottom left of the screen, it's basically fine. Everyone hates the idea, but no one knows about it, so you've got away with it. Keir Starmer's lockdown voice coach meeting falls into that category. People can't really remember it. Top right of the screen, you're in heaven, because everyone loves it and everyone knows about it. Increasing the minimum wage, helping Ukraine, they both fall into the sweet spot, I should say. But the place where you really don't want to be is the bottom right, because that means everyone knows about the policy and they hate it. So by far, the most hated policy is the winter fuel payment cut. And the public are more aware of it than any other thing this Labour government has done. So for political reasons, they probably had to U-turn. But of course, the fact they spent 11 months doing it has caused them an inordinate amount of political pain that turned out to be entirely unnecessary. Well, Sky's Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has tonight's first report.
Just less than a year ago, the Chancellor walked into the biggest, most difficult decision of her career, cutting winter fuel payments for most pensioners. On the day, she told me why it had to be done.
It's not an easy decision to announce that winter fuel payment would only go to people receiving pensioner credit, but it is the right decision in the circumstances in which we find ourselves.
Fast forward to May, and it was that decision blamed for a dreadful night in the local elections. A month later, and now she says she's listened and will reinstate payments for 9 million out of the 10 million pensioners.
From this winter, 9 million pensioners will now receive winter fuel payments. It will be still means tested, but at a higher level.
Interview after interview, a succession of difficult questions.
I was always clear that the number one priority of this government was to return stability to the economy. We did that with a number of difficult decisions, but because of those decisions, our public finances are now in a better position.
Isn't it verging on fake news to claim that the economy is substantially better? The OBR halved growth in March. The OECD downgraded Britain just a week ago. It's just not true that we're in a better position.
Well, the Office of Budget Responsibility it increased the growth forecast for every other year.
There's a pattern post-local elections. The Labour left shouts and you crumble. Winter fuel gone without you telling us how you're going to pay for it. Two-child benefit cap being junked. Disability cuts softened. You're cosplaying fiscal discipline. Isn't this the worst nightmare of the markets? They are learning that you can't say no to your MPs.
I set out the spending envelope in the budget and the spring statement and we'll be setting out the spending settlements for every government department based on that envelope that we set in the budget and in the spring statement. And markets and the public will be able to see public services living within their means, living within the totals that we set out this week.
Opponents call it an embarrassment.
The most humiliating climb down a government has ever faced in its first year in office.
This is a Chancellor who has been spooked by her own side, blowing a black hole of up to £1 billion in the budget that she's going to have to fill, probably with tax rises in the autumn, not the run-up to a spending review that any Chancellor would have wanted. Is Rachel Reeves a good Chancellor, Paul?
Rachel Reeves has, to be fair to her, inherited a really difficult situation. I think the error, if she's made an error, is she left herself so little space for manoeuvre in the budget back in October.
Will she now be forgiven by pensioners and forgiven by ex-Labour voters? Could this week be the one that leaves more people smiling on the Chancellor? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, lots to talk about. Sam Coates is here, plus our duo for the evening as well, the former Conservative Party co-chair, Baroness Sayeeda Warsi, and the former Shadow Attorney-General, Baroness Shami Chakrabarti. Two baronesses, love it. Always good. Right, Sam, what does this decision tell us about the government, do you think?
Well, I really struggle with this basically story of what's happened over the last year with Winter Fuel, because if you remember last July, Rachel Reeves took the decision to means test because the public sector and the public finances were in such a bad state. It was an emergency. Now, the economy has not substantially improved. As you saw in that film, the OBR halved growth this year in its March forecast. Last week, the OECD downgraded growth this year. Yet ministers seem to be going around saying things are a lot better. I can tell you, Sophie, inside government, even inside Number 10, they're like, I'm not sure that we can credibly say that. But at the same time, what do they say, given that they feel that they had to do this U-turn because of political pressure? And they feel that they needed to do it now to get it out the way because the damage done politically by doing this to pensioners has been so deep and caused such a lot of problems on the doorstep in the local elections. But for a Chancellor who has made so much of fiscal discipline to do a U-turn and not tell us how it's funded, I think that is pretty incredible. And the question is, does she just fold and fold and fold and no longer worry about the things that seemed so important to her, balancing the books last year?
Let's bring in our panel at this point, shall we? Shami, what's your take on the U-turn? It clearly is a U-turn, isn't it?
I'm all for U-turns if they're in the right direction. And, I would be happy with a narrative, which is that we've understood the scale of concern about this cut and we've listened. As for the economy, the economy's good, I'm a humble lawyer, not a clever economist. The people that crashed the economy in 2008, I'm not in their esteemed company. But I'm just relieved, frankly, that this change has happened. Would I have liked it to have happened earlier? Of course. In the political bubble in Westminster, it really matters what the narrative is about why you changed your mind. In the country, I hope that a lot of people will be relieved that they get the payment when they thought they wouldn't. And I'm glad that the announcements come today ahead of the spending review, whereas I think a few days ago we were concerned that we wouldn't even hear who benefited until later in the year, which was no good.
Do you agree with that, that actually, it's not the narrative that matters, it's the decision?
Oh, completely. And this was the right decision to take. It was the right decision to take ethically, and it was the right decision to take politically. And it was interesting that when this announcement was first made, they had opposition from all benches. The Conservatives opposed this, Reform opposed this, the Liberal Democrats opposed this, the Greens opposed this, the Scottish Nats opposed this. So literally, it was Labour versus the rest of Parliament. And it was interesting, from left and right, people were saying this is not the right decision for them to be making. And there were question marks right from the outset about the reality of the precise savings that they were going to make as a result of this. It started off at 1.4 billion, then they were said it was probably around the billion mark, then there were question marks raised about how the welfare budget would have to go out to meet the shortfall. But I think the concern really is whether or not Labour are genuinely committed to fiscal discipline. And I think there was a sense, historically, because of the way in which Labour had been painted about being so blasé with the public finances, although I think we kind of trashed that as well as Conservatives during our tenure.
Liz Truss fiscal discipline,
exactly.
Forgive me,
no, well, that's exactly why I think, we trashed that as we went along. But I think historically, because of the narrative around how Labour haven't been sensible with the public finances, I think Labour were really keen to constantly keep talking about fiscal discipline. And I think to some extent, when you say you believe in something and then slowly it appears that you don't, that trust deficit starts to come in. And I think Rachel Reeves is going to be really careful about how that will have an impact on so many other decisions that she makes. And listen, budgets always unravel. We had pasty tax. We had so many bits of our budget that used to unravel. And sometimes you've just got to hold your hand up and say,
doesn't have to take 11 months, though, right?
Exactly. We made a bad decision. Let's get on with it and accept that we need to move on from it.
I mean, it's really interesting what you're saying. Look, it'll come as no surprise to any of you, the Labour Party is split on this. There are some MPs, perhaps those facing, Tory opponents in their seat, who think that Labour really does have a big job to do to convince and keep convincing the public that they're credible with the economy, that they're not going to tax and spend and borrow too much and let things run out of control. And that wing, bluntly, are worried about what they've seen. And there's another increasingly well-organised wing within the Labour Party who've got a bit of momentum behind them, who seem to be listened to by the Chancellor, slightly more soft-left MPs who think they need to scream from the rooftops about the level of spending, particularly you're going to get in the spending review.
Can I ask you something? Because, I understand the upset over Winter Fuel, I really do, and the fact that it impacted so many people. But it does feel that politically, pensioners are like the safest group of people in society, right? And actually pensioner poverty has not increased in anything like the same way as child poverty, for example.
So I think I hear you on that. And of course, children don't vote and pensioners vote and write letters to the news. But there isn't this homogeneous group called pensioners. There are some pensioners in our country eating dog food, and and we're always being told about the gazillionaire.
But this is going to go
pensioners.
up to, if you've got a two-pensioner household,
35 grand.
then that's 70 grand for a couple.
Look, there's always a challenge in the Labour Party between these principles of universality on the one hand and means testing on the other. Always a challenge. If you think about the NHS, which is so beloved in this country, even the Tories, whether they really believe in it or not, don't dare say they don't. Everyone's got a stake in the NHS because it's universal. Everybody has a stake in it. But the way that we fund it is through taxation, which ought to be, of course, means tested and progressive. I think the mistake, perhaps, was tying our hands about taxation. Progressive taxation, where the wealthiest corporations and individuals pay a bit more and a bigger proportion of their wealth and income, I think ultimately has to be the way to square this circle.
I wonder whether the big things of today is we saw a very difficult decision taken a year ago, undone today. Can this government take any more difficult decisions and stick to them?
Interesting stuff. Saida, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think the politics of this is where it will fall in the end. Can we trust them in the future on the big decisions that they make on the economy? Actually, can we trust them when they make U-turns and are not honest about why they've U-turned? And in the end, will they be able to unite their own party, which desperately needs to be united for them to move forward? OK, it's been a really interesting discussion. Thanks all very much indeed. Well, on this, and picking on some of the points that Sam Coates was just making, I spoke to the Treasury Minister, James Murray, earlier. Thank you very much for being on the programme today. So why have you made this decision today on Winter Fuel?
Well, we've taken this decision because we recognise that last year we took a tough but correct decision to respond to the fiscal inheritance we had as a government. We took urgent action to steady the public finances. But since then, we've had a situation where the public finances are now on a firmer footing. The economy's been growing. There's a lot more to do in terms of the economy, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we're out of the woods now. There's a lot more to do in the economy. But we're in a position now where listening to people and hearing what they're saying about the threshold of means testing for the winter fuel payment, we can now respond to that by saying, OK, we agree on the principle of means testing. I think most people in the country agree on the principle of means testing, but it's time to raise that threshold.
I really don't say this lightly, but I just don't believe that is the truth for why you've reversed this policy. You say that the economy is on a firmer footing. You say that the economy's been growing. The growth forecasts have got worse since you announced the policy on winter fuel. Debt has gone up. It's just not true. Won't just hold your hands up and say, we've got it wrong. The public reaction to this has shown that people are really unhappy with the policy.
No, there's a really important point here, which is that we can only take this kind of decision that we're taking around raising the threshold because the economy is in a better place. I'm not saying that's
exactly what... That's what I'm coming back on. You announced this policy in July. In October, the budget growth was predicted to be 2% this year. In March, the OBR halved that to 1%. Since then, Trump, tariffs, it's all got worse. So that's what the OECD has said. It's just not true.
If you look, Sophie, the first quarter of this year, we've had the fastest growing economy in the G7. In terms of the long-term forecasts from the OBR over the rest of this Parliament, the OBR have increased growth over the course of this Parliament because of some of the reforms we've made. We've had 4 interest rates cuts. But that has meant that because we're listening to what people have been saying, about the threshold that we decided last year for winter fuel payment.
Why don't you just be upfront and say, we have been listening to what people have been saying about the threshold? That's the truth, isn't it?
Well, we absolutely have been listening, but the point I'm making, and it's an important one,
is that the growth is halved, so that's why you're in a firm footing. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
We're only able to take these decisions because the public finances are in a firmer position, and so we've taken.
You don't believe that.
Absolutely. Look, we had to take it.
But you don't believe that. I don't believe you believe that. You're a clever man. The growth forecasts have been halved since then. Look at the global picture. Look at Donald Trump. Look at tariffs.
No, look,
it's on a worse footing. I'm not blaming you for it. I'm just saying that is the truth.
But if you look, Sophie, you'll know what the public finances were like last year when we won the general election. You'll know what we discovered when we came into office.
Debt's gone up since July. I've looked at the figures. Debt levels are worse. July 2024, it was 94.8% GDP. Now it's 95.5% GDP. It's got worse.
You'll know about the fiscal spending pressures, the black hole that we
Inflation's
inherited
worse.
when we took over
Growth's
office.
Been
and
halved.
you will know that if we hadn't... Imagine if last year, when we'd won the general election, we had seen the fiscal situation and we hadn't taken action to correct it.
I'm not
that
saying...
would have left us in a really, really bad situation.
This is really important. I'm not blaming you for this. I'm not saying that you weren't put in a position where you had a bad inheritance and you had to make difficult decisions. You know, that is all an argument that I can accept. What I can't accept is you saying that you've changed this because the economy has improved since you announced it. It's not true.
I'm saying we can only take this decision now because the public finances are on a firmer footing.
Why are they on a firmer footing?
Because of the decisions that we took last year.
What's the evidence that the evidence that the economy is on a firmer footing now? What's the evidence?
If you look at the public finances, the Chancellor set out her fiscal rules last year. Those fiscal rules are being met in terms of what happened to the budget last year. In terms of the update of the spring statement, the Chancellor said the fiscal floor is non-negotiable.
None of this makes sense to me.
It does make... the reason why it's important...
I'm just saying, it doesn't make sense to me what you're saying. I'm asking for the evidence that the economy's improved. Where is that evidence?
Well, we're the fastest growing G7 economy in the first quarter of this year. If you look at the OBR report...
the growth is halved. The forecast since... You know, this is what... From when you announced this policy, which is the comparison... Growth got worse, the forecast got worse.
No, if you look at the OBR forecast over the course of this Parliament, they have increased the rate of growth.
I'm talking about this year.
But if you look at the foundations of the economy in terms of the public finances, in terms of the growth forecast over the course of this Parliament, because of actions that we've taken, if you look at what's happened to interest rates since the general election, you know, look, we can trade stats back and forth all day long if you like, but the key point here is that because of the position that we're in terms of the public finances, and because, as you rightly say, you know, we have been listening to what people have been saying about the threshold for means testing. We're now in a position to lift that threshold because I think most people across the country agree that winter fuel payments should be means tested. I don't think people disagree with that principle. I think people, you know, spoke to us and told us their concerns about the level that we had set the means testing threshold at after the decision we took last year. And that's why now, because of the position we're in, we're able to raise that to £35,000, which now means that the majority of pensioners, over 3/4 of pensioners, will be able to benefit from the winter fuel payment this winter.
Can I ask you about child poverty as well? Because there is an argument that some have been making in the House of Commons today that pension poverty has improved, but child poverty has been getting worse. And can I ask about the two-child benefit cap in particular? Because it's something that I know a lot of your MPs are concerned about. Is that something that you're looking at?
Well, look, the issue about child poverty is one that is really important for the Prime Minister, for the Chancellor, for all of us as MPs in the Labour Party and in government. And what we've been doing over the last few months is having this child poverty task force, which is looking at all the possible levers that we can use to tackle child poverty. And that will set out a comprehensive approach, a comprehensive plan to tackle child poverty. Now, there are some measures that we've taken recently, which you'll see around the increase in eligibility for free school meals. That will help tackle child poverty. But I think we need to see all of the different measures in the round, and that's why the task force has been set up to consider all of the possible levers which we can use to tackle it.
That decision on winter fuel is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the political editor of The Sun, Jack Elsom, and the political editor of The Guardian, Pippa Creer. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. As both the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats claim credit for Rachel Reeves' winter fuel U-turn, we'll hear from the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary. That's next.
we've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. Let's get some more reaction, shall we, to the government's winter fuel U-turn. Earlier I spoke to the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Helen Whately, for the Conservatives. Thank you very much for being on the programme. So the government's reversed its policy on winter fuel payment and you're welcoming that. Why?
Well, I welcome the government making a U-turn on this. We've been campaigning for them to reverse the decision for nearly a year now, so at least they have listened to that. I mean, they made a big, big mistake. They should never have done what they did. And they penalised hundreds of thousands of pensioners. It wasn't something that they would warn that they would do before the election. And then Rachel Reeves made out that it was the right thing to do. Actually, one of the things that I think they are doing, which is very wrong at the moment, is the Chancellor is now saying, oh, well, the economy has changed and now we can afford it. But actually, that's not the case at all. In fact, all the economic metrics are going in the wrong direction.
Let's talk about the U-turn, because you say that you're happy that they've done it, but obviously that it was a mistake in the first place. But, I mean, you guys have had your fair share of U-turns as well, right? You know how it is. Don't they deserve a bit of credit for listening and changing course?
Well, actually, what they should do is that they should say sorry.
You didn't do that. You should have done that when you were in power as well.
It's almost like they have forgotten that what we're talking about is like thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, by their own figures say that 50,000 pensioners were forced into poverty by what they did last year, and 100,000 extra people went to A&E. So that's happened, and I just find it extraordinary that they don't say, sorry, we got this wrong, now we're trying to fix it.
Oh, come on, you guys never said, sorry, we got this wrong.
Of course, well,
when you promised no new tax rises in your 2019 Tory manifesto, and then you were the most tax-raising parliament up until that point.
Look, there's plenty of times.
I'm very sorry, we got it very wrong.
Kemi Badenoch has said herself, we made mistakes when we were in government. We acknowledge that. But one of the things I think that the Chancellor is getting very wrong is she is trying to pull the wool over people's eyes as if somehow the economic position has changed and now she can afford to do this. She hasn't said how she's going to fund this. But what we do know is that compared to when she actually announced this last year, well, the growth figures have been revised down and inflation is higher, unemployment is up, borrowing is up, the cost of borrowing is up. So many economic metrics are going in the wrong direction.
I actually put quite a lot of those things to the Labour Minister when I spoke to him. Their argument on that is that growth is, up the first quarter of this year and that the interest rates have been coming down. So
but the interest rates are higher now than they were when Rachel Reeves announced this, and growth has been revised down compared to where it was going to be, so I don't think that washes.
So you said today that this decision is too late for the 50,000 pensioners plunged into poverty this winter. Some people would argue that pensioner poverty has been getting better across time. Obviously, I'm not trying to negate how awful it is and how important it is, but the thing that has clearly been getting worse is child poverty. And yet you still believe that it is right to keep the two-child benefit cap. Why is that?
So one of the crucial things for the prospects of children is whether they're in a family that works, and that's something that we worked really hard on when we were in government. And the point about the two-child cap is that it's about fairness. So there are many families who decide that actually they're not going to be able to afford to have many children, more children, because they need to be able to make ends meet. And when you're in work, just because you have another child doesn't mean that your income...
It's not the child's fault, though, is it? I think that's the really important thing.
Just because you have another child doesn't mean that your income is going to go up. And it's not fair for people in that situation to be funding extra money for households that are relying on benefits and having more children. Now, of course, let's not get confused between child benefit, which, of course, does go to every child, and this, which is about the cap on the universal credit amount for an extra child.
Yeah, but
I guess about fairness.
I guess the argument on fairness is when you're talking about children, you don't decide what family you're born into, right? But you do have to live with the consequences. And, the research does show that this is pushing children into poverty.
Well, actually, I mean, what I would say to the government is there are better things that they can do to support children and their households not to be living in poverty. One, for instance, is to be making sure that people are in work. One of the things that we've seen under this government already is that unemployment is going up. It's harder for people to get into work. And we know it makes such a big difference to the prospects for a child whether someone in their household is working. That's the sort of thing the government should be doing, not looking at whether they get rid of the child benefit cap.
So we've heard from Labour, we've heard from the Conservatives. Now let's look at how damaging the U-turn could be for the government and also for the relationship between the Prime Minister and his Chancellor. I spoke to Keir Starmer's former political director, Luke Sullivan. Good to have you on the programme.
Thank you.
The first time to speak to you since, of course, you left working for the government. So I'm really keen, as someone who has been close to this number 10, to get some of your views, particularly on this winter fuel U-turn. Some people in number 10 think it's toxic, it had to be changed. Others think they've had 10, 11 months of living through the political pain and now they're not going to get the money either. What do you think?
What do I think? I think ultimately there's no doubting this has been a really difficult decision for the government and the political ramifications have been very strongly felt. There was a clear message that number 10, politicians, one of the benefits of politicians having elections is having to speak to voters, knocking on door. And there was a clear message during the local elections and also in the by-election that winter fuel was a decision that the public felt wasn't one they were expecting this government to make, and it had a really deep political impact.
Did you get any sense when you were in number 10 of Keir Starmer talking about this policy, whether it's something he supported, if he was uneasy about it?
So, I mean, I stopped working after the general election and also wasn't involved in this decision, and that's not me trying to...
That's handy.
It's not
Nothing
me
to do with me.
I mean, I think ultimately the backdrop to this was a decision that was made just before the summer recess in July, and I think this is why Rachel Reeves and the Treasury and the government will continue to defend it's the right decision. The context they feel they were working in was coming in, being told by the Treasury that there was a big black hole, and they had to reassure both the country but also the markets that this was a government that was willing to make tough decisions, and that's why this was a decision, not made out of choice, not made out of political, wanting to make it by Rachel Reeves. They felt this was a decision they had to make to, cut the cloth accordingly of the government to make the books balance.
I'm interested to hear they're talking about Rachel Reeves and the Treasury team, because it's felt to me like her and Keir Starmer for so long have been joined at the hip. She's the kind of safest person in government. Do you think that this U-turn and the political fallout from it are going to be, I guess, put at her door? Is it damaging for the Chancellor?
I think whenever you have U-turns, it's understandable, especially in the Westminster village, that people are going to try and look at the intricacies and who's up, who's down. I think ultimately Keir and Rachel have a really strong relationship, not just personally and professionally, but also their teams, the individuals who are around them who have worked for Keir or, they are a tight team. We've also seen during this spending review that it's a tight team. Yes, it's been quite tough going. They've just announced that the lid is closed, that they've got a settlement. But ultimately, this is a number 10 and a Treasury that are aligned closely, and that starts with Rachel and Keir.
Right, let's get a final word, shall we, from Saida and Shami. It's been quite useful, actually, I think, kind of seeing the government pitch, seeing the opposition pitch, and then a bit of the inside track as well. Saida, what's your, I guess, kind of conclusion on where this all leaves the government?
Well, I think Luke's interview really said it all, and had the government spokespeople been a bit more like Luke, I don't think we'd have been having the conversation that we're having. Look, politicians are humans. We make mistakes. We make decisions in government. They made that decision very early on. They were trying to manage what they thought were very difficult finances, and it would just be honest of them to come along and say all of that in the way that Luke has just said it, and I think that just sits better with the public. At the moment, it feels like whether it was the, the kind of the immigration announcements, whether it was the speech about strangers, whether it's this announcement, it just feels like a lot of knee-jerk reaction to what happened in the local elections. And I just think that's not the way that the current government needs to be behaving. I think it kind of shows that There's no depth in the understanding and the beliefs and the values of the government. And they have to really step back and say, who are we? Who is the Labour Party? What does it stand for? And even when the going gets tough, we need to be able to stick to those values. And I say that as a centre-right politician. You know, I think whether people agree or disagree with your politics, and often, you know, people will come up to me and say, look, I disagree with your politics, but I do like to hear you tell us it as it is, because people like to feel like that politicians are being straight with them, even if they're giving them bad news.
Shami.
Well, I have to agree with Saida.
That's allowed, don't worry.
You know, whether decisions are popular or not, I don't think our communications in this government have been what so many of us really want to see. That's the big vision stuff. Yes, of course, there was a gazillion-pound black hole. We heard that narrative, that drumbeat, fair enough. But people still want to know what the vision is for the other side of that black hole. It's not just about particular decisions and whether you've doubled down too long. It's the big picture as well as the narrative. We didn't get the credit today for the increase in free school meals, which I think is an incredibly positive story, because we're having conversations about U-turns. So big picture stuff, big message. What do we want the country to be in the future? And then people will put up with some of the tough stuff.
OK, and as you said earlier, maybe a bit more space to do that. Labour will be hoping at the spending review after getting the bad news out of the way. Thanks both very much indeed. Right, next tonight, taking a leaf out of Harold Wilson's book and his faith in the white heat of technology, Rachel Reeves is expected to put AI at the heart of her plans to deliver growth in Wednesday's spending review. And the Prime Minister was beating the drum for it today, positioning the technology as a public service saviour and not a job killer.
I've always said AI and tech makes us more human, which sounds an odd thing to say, but it's true. And we need to say it because, look, some people out there are sceptical. They do worry about AI taking their job. And I know for an audience like this is a debate that's been had perhaps many times, and we need to push past it.
But in stark contrast, on a visit to South Wales today, Nigel Farage said his party would like to re-industrialise and would reopen the blast furnaces in Port Talbot should reform come to power.
We are going to need a lot of steel. Our belief is we should be producing our own steel. Our belief is, for what uses coal still has, we should produce our own coal. I'm not saying let's open up all the pits. What I am saying is there's coal, specific types of coal for certain uses that we still need in this country, and we certainly will need for the blast furnaces here, that we should produce ourselves rather than importing them.
Right, let's bring in Saida Shami. I find this quite fascinating, actually, the contrast today, where you've got Keir Starmer talking about AI, what many people would see as the future, something that we've got to get behind. Others feel very worried about, think it's going to take jobs away. You've got Nigel Farage, on the other hand, talking about reopening blast furnaces. Who do you think's right, Shami, or is it a combination?
Well, I think there's a combination. I mean, I do think it. I mean, Nigel Farage is the original shapeshifter. He used to be a Thatcherite, you know, and we know the history of closing down coal mines and so on. And indeed, Thatcher was one of the first leaders on the world stage to warn about climate change. I think the way she closed down coal mines was pretty brutal, and people in the north and other parts of the country, Wales, are still feeling the consequences today. As with AI, it's not straightforward. Yes, there are amazing things in terms of cancer diagnosis and all sorts of other innovations that can come. But goodness me, this is powerful technology, like weapons technology and drugs technology. It needs to be regulated. We can't be in the pocket of big tech. We need to make sure that injustices that we live with already are not baked in, so that some people become uninsurable, some people are constantly picked up by facial recognition technology, and some people can't get a job interview because rubbish in, rubbish out into this advanced technology that sits in a black box above and outside the law. So I think, yes, AI is potentially very exciting, but let's not be too wide-eyed about it. It needs law, governance, politics to regulate it.
That's really interesting. What do you make about the Farage-Starmer contrast today?
Well, I mean, I think we may think that Nigel Farage is a bit out of touch because he's talking about coal mines, but it could be far worse. It could be his new MP who's talking about burqas being a priority when she's come from a constituency where I think 22% of children live in child poverty, and she's got 3 of some of the most deprived estates wards in the country. So, you know, are reform out of touch in talking about the issues that really concern people? Well, you know, there's another example of it. But I think the more important point is the issue on AI. I am concerned that we don't have regulation. I am concerned that we don't have legislation on what is such an important, yes, valuable, but also hugely, has the potential to be hugely dangerous form of development in technology. The European Union have already got legislation. They introduced an act last year. It's coming in a phased way and will be fully operational 24 months from 2024. We are so far behind in the regulation of this space. And if we are going to properly harness the benefits of AI, then we need to properly manage the dangers of AI. And we're not doing that second part of it. And I really hope that the Prime Minister, in all its enthusiasm, which is great, and in all this support, which is great, also says, but we need to be protected too.
It's such an interesting debate. We're going to be a bit of a tease at the end of the programme, but we will be doing a little bit more on some of the dangers of AI later as well. I wonder, because if you look at public services, it seems to me like the kind of perennial problem in our country is that people are not willing to pay the level of tax that they would like to fund for, you know, the level of public services that they would like to see, right? Could AI be transformative for public services?
Look, all technology has that capability, but remember, a jar of pills can make you feel better or it could end your life. You know, and the same is true of a carving knife, let alone every technology that we've ever known. I agree with Saida, there needs to be regulation. On tax, we need progressive taxation in this country where the wealthiest corporations and individuals pay a bigger portion. At the moment, it's actually people on lower incomes, whether they're small businesses or whether they are individuals, who pay an unfair portion compared to the super rich.
What's your take on AI on public services?
I think, I mean, I agree with Shami here. I think that the potential for what AI can do, and look, we've used it in our own daily lives. I'm starting to use AI in the way in which it can cut down the amount of time it requires to do research. But I also think there's a worry to this. Whereas I feel the benefits of that and think, wow, that was great, I've managed to find all this information, I feel that the ability to test whether that information was accurate, the source of that information, we can't blindly trust AI, just like we wouldn't blindly go in and just read one source.
And we don't
say
have
that
transparency at the moment, and we don't have law.
But all of these points we're going to do more on later. Really, really interesting debate to be had. Now, more than 1,000 doctors have written to MPs urging them to vote against the assisted dying bill. In an open letter, doctors from across the NHS warned the terminally ill adults bill poses what they describe as a real threat to both patients and the medical workforce, and it's simply not safe. It comes as the proposed legislation is due to return to the House of Commons for a vote on Friday. Sky's health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports.
Doctors. Over 1,000 of them adding their voices against the assisted dying bill.
This current bill is simply not safe. There are inadequate safeguards against coercion. We know that a very small number of coercion cases eventually go through to prosecution. It's very hard to spot.
Do you not believe that this legislation has more safeguards than any piece of legislation before it? Do you simply not accept that?
Surely the question here is, are the safeguards good enough? And you have in front of you a letter from over 1,000 doctors that have said the safeguards aren't enough.
In a letter sent to MPs, they say, as experienced medical professionals who regularly work with dying patients and who have reviewed the worldwide evidence on assisted dying, it is our opinion that this bill poses a real threat to both patients and the medical workforce, and we urge you to vote against it. But Dr. David Nicol is a medical professional who has worked with dying patients, and he disagrees with his clinical colleagues.
Doctors are actually no different than the public in that there are a wide range of opinions on this. There are 395,000 doctors in the UK, so the fact that 1,000 doctors disagree with assisted dying, and probably always will, actually should not be a surprise.
So the medical community, like wider society, remains divided. But ultimately, neither will decide. Yes, they can influence their MPs, but when the bill returns to Parliament, it will be up to the politicians who will have their say on whether or not to introduce the biggest social change to this country that many of us will ever see in our lifetimes. And some MPs are already reconsidering their position.
I abstained on the first time round. I decided I wasn't going to vote because I wanted to hear the debate. Of course, I don't want anybody to feel that they're a burden on society and feel that that should lead them towards taking their own life. But I also have heard the cries of people who are absolutely miserable, and that's why I will be voting for the bill.
Daniel Francis has a daughter who has cerebral palsy, and he's worried about safeguards.
I support the principle of assisted dying, but I don't believe this bill, as it is fit for purpose. I'm the parent of a child who has very complex disabilities, including a learning disability, and I believe that the Mental Capacity Act was not written for this scenario.
But your daughter would be safeguarded against assisted dying.
My daughter would be safeguarded simply because of the level of mental capacity she has. The principles of the Mental Capacity Act, I believe, will lead to scenarios where somebody with a learning disability will go through this process without their family member being aware and could well be assisted by the doctor to make this decision.
This debate will rage on for the next 2 weeks and beyond. Rightly so. This is literally a decision about life and death. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Still to come on the Politics Hub. Can AI lie? How Sky's Sam Coates was gaslit by ChatGPT. That's next.
Hello, coming up on the UK Tonight from 8, the shocking radicalisation of an autistic teenager. Rhiannon Rudd took her own life after she was investigated for terrorism offences. Today, an inquest heard she was groomed by 2 American white supremacists, one of whom was her mother's boyfriend. Also ahead tonight, a major U-turn on the winter fuel payment and tributes to Uriah Rennie, the Premier League's first black referee who has died at the age of 65. All that and much more on the UK Tonight from 8.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them. Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island. The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, we were just talking about AI. Can it deliver the growth the Chancellor needs to pay for her promises and, let's be honest, save her job? But of course, there's another more fundamental question about this new tech. Can it be trusted? Now, going on the recent experience of our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, the answer is a little bit jaw-dropping. Here's his report.
Artificial intelligence, AI, the future of work, life, and we are to be told this week, government, helping the state work better and cheaper. But this comes only days after Sky News revealed how AI can fabricate, lie, then doubles down.
This is meant to be what I just recorded, but it had made it all up. I mean, at this point, ChatGPT is gaslighting me. No such thing exists. It's all complete fake. And finally, AI confesses. Look at this.
Oh, wow.
Since we revealed on Friday that AI invented an episode of our Politics at Sam and Anne's podcast, I've been flooded with other examples of AI hallucinations, which feel like lies. Here's a former business secretary who oversaw AI policy with this.
When I queried it, it admitted that it was wrong and gave me an answer that was completely different.
He's also a former Select Committee chair who investigated AI last year.
When I chaired the Science and Technology Select Committee, hallucination was one of the problems, but it was expected to diminish over time. But what we seem to have discovered, and when I say, Sam, your exchange with ChatGPT, it seems to admit that actually they're certainly not fading away and might even be getting worse.
But is it? We decided to ask ChatGPT itself using its conversation mode to find out more.
I'm just your friendly AI assistant, here to help you out with anything you need.
Now, research by ChatGPT's parent company suggests new models released in recent months have more hallucinations, as much as 48% of the time in some cases. But does it think it's lying more or less?
Yeah, the concept of AI hallucinations is definitely something that's been talked about, and it's still a challenge. The technology is always improving, and newer versions tend to do a better job at staying accurate.
See there, it's saying things are getting better, but the data suggests the opposite, so I press it.
Hang on. Can you give me the specific stats from the most recent OpenAI study into the newest models of ChatGPT's hallucination rate?
So according to recent internal tests from OpenAI, the newer models have shown higher hallucination rates. For instance, the model known as O3 had about a 33% hallucination rate, while the O4 mini model had around 48%.
A moment ago, you told me it was getting better. Now you're telling me you're confessing it's getting worse. This isn't a great look.
I get where you're coming from, and I'm sorry for the mixed messages. The performance of these models can vary.
It's London Tech Week, fronted by a Prime Minister who hopes AI has answers for his government too. But are we all too trusting? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Honestly, this reporting is kind of blowing my mind slightly. And that might be because I'm a bit of an AI Luddite and everyone knew this was going on. But for me, it's been a bit of a wake-up call, I have to say, about AI. I don't know what you think.
This is what I expected. This has been my own experience. This is the research that comes out of the US in particular, places like MIT, the Netflix documentary Coded Bias, rubbish in, rubbish out. A lot of this technology is replicating the attitudes of the original designers, often male, often tech bros from Silicon Valley, a little bit cocky, a little bit arrogant, want to be right at all costs. As I say, I'm not totally against it, but we have to open up the black box, not hand over all our personal data to it, and we need it to be regulated and governed by law.
Well, the two mind-blowing parts of those reports from Sam were, firstly, just how human that conversation sounded and how emotionally intelligent and engaging it was, felt it was, and therefore you genuinely felt like you were talking to quite a sympathetic, empathetic individual at the other side. So even when it was lying, it felt like it was believable. And the second part of it was just how argumentative and petulant, and how it doubled down when it was found out that it was lying. It still tried to argue that it didn't. And I kind of think if this was was, I mean, look, we're adults, you know, we're well informed on these issues, and this was an experiment. Imagine when children come into contact with this. Imagine when young adults come into contact with this. Imagine when vulnerable people come into contact with this and where this could take it. And that is why this has to have regulation. We need legislation. We need to have a proper framework so we can take the best of it, but control the worst of it.
It's extraordinary. And how quickly it's changing and getting better as well. As you said, like just the voice and all that kind of stuff as well.
It's getting more credible, but it isn't getting more truthful or accurate. And as I say, we need to open up that black box and we need to take back control, because it's our data that's being used for training purposes in the first place, and it's our lives that are going to be affected.
Really interesting. Thanks both very much indeed. Great to have you on the programme today. That's it from us tonight. Ali will be here tomorrow. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee, and then at 9 p.m, The World with Yalda Hakeem. But Ali, we'll see you tomorrow.